Welcome to SpacePod. So I'm joined today with my great pal at IBM, Paul Gatland.
Hello, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. And I'm also joined someone at the sharp end of the space challenges, Gerald Waterfall from the IBM Global Real Estate team. Gerald.
Good morning, Paul. How are you doing?
Appreciate your time today. So before we start, we just need to say that this podcast is entirely a personal point of view, not representative of the IBM organizational strategies. Let's just start, Gerald, by asking you, where are you right now in the world?
I'm in my home office, of which I'm very familiar with over the last several weeks or so. I don't think I've ever spent as much time in it as I have, but live in Hampshire, live in the countryside.
Just to get started, I just want to ask you, if you don't mind, give the audience a view on the role you have and, size and complexity of this portfolio. I know I'm one of, like Paul, 300,000 employees, so we've all got to go somewhere.
My responsibilities are in the UK, so as you quite rightly said, I work for IBM's Global Real Estate team. I sort of wear two hats at the moment. I'm a property portfolio manager, so I'm responsible for a number of the sites within the UK, including the largest location we have, which is the Hursley campus, 800,000 square feet, 30-odd buildings. So a very large, interesting area and location to work at. I also have other locations under my responsibility, and I'm also now involved in delivering some of the framework projects that we deliver within the UK. The UK portfolio as a whole, we're about 3.5 million square foot these days, around 20 buildings, I would say. So ranging from the big Hursley campus, as I said, down to a floor within a multi-tenanted building and everything in between. In the European level, we've got about 100 sites across some of our European countries. And then globally, we've got a large portfolio. And, part of the challenges and roles that I have is to ensure that portfolio is meeting IBM's requirements and needs, which, as you can imagine, all the different business units and how it's used is constantly changing. It's constantly flexing. So we need to make sure that we have the right size portfolio built and designed the right way to enable people to work effectively, because if you're a developer working on some software, for example, you're going to probably need a slightly different workplace in its structure and the way that you work compared to a sales function or a consulting function or a very technical function. So it's about understanding the different people working within the portfolio, how they work, and making sure that we have the right facilities available to them to work effectively.
I'm trying to picture in my head the portfolio and the world I live in, the size and scale of what this challenge that we have. And so my first question to follow then is, in business as usual time, things move along in an orderly way, of course. But now with what's happening around the world, business continuity is a really important aspect. So I just wanted, from IBM's perspective or yours, when we talk about business continuity, what sort of things have you had to deal with?
It has been an interesting time. I mean, as we're lucky in the fact that, IBM has traditionally had the ability to work from home. We've had the technology, it's something that's ingrained within our culture and how we work anyway. So, and I know there's a whole range of different people and different functions and what they do. So there's never a one size fits all. People are very much client facing or running data centers. So that's a different sort of environment for them to operate. So, I mean, the challenges from our perspective, initially was just trying to ensure, looking at PPE, looking at what mitigating circumstances and things that we need to plan for. But very quickly we moved to everyone working from home. So, and there are various measures in place to restrict people coming to site. They need to make sure that if they are coming, there's these criteria that they need to meet and they have the relevant authorization. Their company's happy for them to come. We're happy for them to come, to make sure there was a policing of who was coming to site and why they were coming to site. In a perverse way, operationally and project-wise, the FM teams and project teams have been able to get on and do a number of different things. If I look at Hursley as an example, you've got a seat capacity of 3,000 people. And obviously there's no one really there at the moment. So a lot of the external works that we're doing a lot of drainage works at the moment. It's great because we can continue those works. People are socially distancing. The contractors are working in a socially distant manner, complying with government regulations. And they can crack on and dig up roads and do all sorts of things without disrupting day-to-day activities. So some of those project activities have actually gained momentum. And in a weird way, it's been quite productive. The site's been empty. Likewise, operationally, there's less work orders that are being raised. So it's enabled some of the FM team to crack on and get on top of some of the maintenance activities that's a little bit easier to do with the site being quiet. So, struggles, and there's lots of things to consider. It's a very complex overall number of factors that you need to consider. But I think there have been some strange benefits to it, enabling certain activities, maintenance and project-wise, to push along.
Paul, you've got a really interesting point about the role of software.
Yeah, I have. Yeah. So, Gerald, I just wanted to ask you about how you're using software to understand your portfolio, and whether you can give us any insights as to what a COVID crisis is telling you about the buildings and spaces and perhaps the people as well.
Various software that we use. I mean, from a work order perspective, we use Maximo across our site. I think from a COVID perspective, the things where we'd probably get more insight is where we have utilization metrics that are being measured, which is something that we don't do holistically at the moment. It's very much on our roadmap. And as we fit out new offices and projects, or if we are retrofitting, we ensure that we infuse that with IoT so that we have footfall counting and occupancy, environmental sensors and things like that get fed through to what's an IoT platform. So that then gives us much more of an insight and understanding about how that space is being utilized, the actual numbers, the occupancy, how they're using the space, and also the space itself, from a lux, noise capacity, heating, all those sorts of things. So that gives us a bit more insight into how the actual space is used.
So would that be similar to the Bristol office that I saw recently, Gerald?
Yeah, exactly. So that was an example of how we fit out a new space. So design guidelines, it looks very fancy, funky, agile, modern, collaborative, etc. But the technology piece is a critical piece that I try to infuse within our portfolio for a number of different reasons. That the market's definitely going that way, use cases and examples and data that you get from that, and how that can benefit not just myself and the real estate team, but also facility management provider and ultimately the end users as well. So they understand a lot more about their space, what's happening. If they want to acquire darker space to go and do some coding, then they can see that within the floor plate, the visuals. If they want a more open, light, noisy space to work in for the day because they're collaborating, they're talking, they're doing whatever, then they can identify within the floor plate where to go.
I mean, I'm just thinking, you talked about the buildings have suddenly changed because they're less populated. So you're doing different things. Has that given us some insight to, what it was like before? How can I change it in the future? People flow, there's a lot of talk about scheduling people arriving at different times. That seems to be quite a common theme. We're all learning lessons, aren't we?
The real lessons are going to be learned when we come back to the workplace. And, it's a bit of a $1 million question. What's that look like? How's that going to work? And there's a myriad of different things that will affect that, from how the government announce what particular companies' policies are, and the clients that we're working with, for example. So it's definitely not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach. And we have opened some sites in Asia, for example. They're almost the guinea pigs in some ways. And if you look at our Singapore offices and how they're looking to do things, we're looking at them very closely and how these measures work. And likewise, we're doing a similar piece of planning in the UK so that we're ready ourselves to make sure that as the phases start coming back in and things start ramping back up, that we've got these, the different measures in place to make sure that we're covering ourselves. And most importantly,
a shift in how you manage space.
When we put technology in, we don't just do it for the sake of it. Oh, technology is happening, it's changing, let's do it. You've got to be very clear in your approach to what you want to do, why you want to do it. What's your use case? What do I want to see? What's going to be the benefit from it? Utilization and occupancy are always key components of that. Because going back to my earlier comment about right-sizing a portfolio, I mean, real estate's an expensive asset, especially when you've got a number of different buildings and offices and data centers, in the UK and Europe and globally. It's a huge expense. So we're always looking to make sure that we are right-sized for our business units in what they're doing. Looking ahead, the measures we'll probably look to take in place. We want to get as much utilization as possible. Traditionally, we want to get the 80% utilization upwards, which in reality is not always easy to achieve. But coming back to work, the utilization is going to be a lot lower, understandably. And the longer term impact, and the question is, how people's behaviors will change. Some people who haven't really ever worked from home all of a sudden realize, actually, I'm quite productive at home. This is a good environment. I feel safe here. I don't like going to the office quite as much now. So you might notice a drop in utilization, but without having the IoT and the sensors and that information being looked at, you're never going to notice. Anecdotally, you're thinking, oh, I think there's more people here, I think there's less people there. You need that empirical data to help with your planning.
So I'm shifting gears to think about the supply chain to IBM of multiple providers. What changes do you think is going to happen in their world as they come to you to supply services?
Probably a bit early, and there are a lot of different suppliers, as you say. When you look at what's going on, I mean, if you look at cleaning, that's going to be very much up there when it comes to points of discussion around the cleanliness levels and how things are cleaned, when they're cleaned, the frequencies, all those sorts of things as well. Yeah, because it's about transmission. You want to reduce those chances as much as possible. And even hygiene and disinfectants, and there's also responsibilities from the workers themselves to make sure that there's the standards of hygiene are being maintained as well. But then you're looking at the food safety element as well. When you've got a large canteen, how can you look to make sure that that's being looked after and delivered in a clean and amenable way? And then building services, talking about the HVAC equipment. So you've got the AHUs distributing the air. How are we making sure that the filters are up to date? We're not recirculating air with contaminants in it. We need to make sure that the air quality is as clean as possible.
I know we spoke, Gerald, a while ago that you had some stock from a few years ago that was sort of gifted to one of the local hospitals. I mean, can you expand on that? Because obviously that's a great story.
And there were hundreds of thousands of masks stored up somewhere, sealed and looked after. So there was no issues with. And fortunately, we were able. We had some communications with hospitals in Winchester and Southampton. And obviously there has been PPE shortages and questions. So we're able to work with those NHS hospitals and able to ship those pallets of masks to them to help with some of those frontline staff.
Gerald, a big thank you to you. I know you got a lot on your plate, so appreciate you spending a bit of time to share this. And SpacePod is a great platform to just share with people about what we're thinking about. So thank you for that. Paul, buddy on SpacePod, thank you.
Always a pleasure, Paul.
And to the listeners, if you like SpacePod, please tell others. And if you want to join Paul and I on a future cast, please reach out via LinkedIn. You've been listening to SpacePod. Please stay safe.